Hello and welcome. I'm Steve Brunton, and I'm really excited to introduce you to one of my favorite topics in all of math, which is differential equations. So this is a short course I'm putting together. This is actually part of a larger sequence in my engineering math course that I've been offering for about the last 10 years. This is one of my favorite courses to teach, is Math to Engineers. And the part one, kind of the entry level for this as I see it, is really this topic of differential equations. Okay, so I fell in love with differential equations. It opened up a whole world of possibilities, of things you could model, of things you can understand, of things you can build with math, with equations. And so kind of, I feel like this is the next logical step after calculus. So if you like calculus and if you like the way that you can model the world with how things, change in time, this is kind of the next step in that progression, differential equations. We're going to use calculus to model how systems change in time. Okay, so this is kind of one of my favorite examples of a chaotic dynamical system or differential equation called the Lorentz system, which was introduced about a half a century ago, a little bit longer than that, to model chaotic convection in the atmosphere. So we'll talk about this a lot later. This course is meant to be about a 7-week series in a university class. So that's about 20 hours of lectures that I'm going to be putting together here. And kind of all that I assume that you know is that you have taken a calculus class. I don't even assume that you remember most of your calculus class. I'm assuming that you are smart and motivated, that you have seen some of these calculus concepts before, but maybe you don't remember them. And I'm going to build everything up from scratch into this pretty rich and complex world of differential equations. Okay, good. So in this video, I'm going to kind of lay out what are the topics we're going to cover in the class, what are some of the applications that we can open up and enable with this kind of analysis of differential equations. I'm inherently going to be folding in linear algebra because the way I see it, really these two topics should be taught completely together. You can't understand differential equations without linear algebra, and differential equations are probably the best motivating example to understand linear algebra better. So for me, linear algebra is a piece, it's a part of differential equations. You can't separate those. So we'll talk about topics, applications. I'll tell you kind of where this fits in. So I've already told you this is kind of the next logical piece after calculus, but I'll tell you also what's next. Once you learn these differential equations, what new fields of math are going to be open up to you. And I'll tell you how to get some of the resources that we're going to use throughout this class. So in the video description below, I'm going to put links to all of the code for the entire class. Everything's going to be available in Python and MATLAB. There will be PDF notes for all of the lectures, so every single video is going to have a lecture notes with it. There will be a course website. I'm planning on writing, a short book on this topic, so maybe by the time you watch this, for those of you time travelers from the future, maybe there will actually be, a typed up book that you can reference. But all of that will be in the video description. Good, and I'll tell you why I think this is important and interesting. It's one of my favorite topics. Okay, so overview of topics that are going to be covered in this course, in this kind of 20 hours of material that fits into this larger engineering math framework. I'm going to start with a simple review of calculus. This will be super brief, super short. But again, I'm going to assume you've taken calculus, but maybe you don't remember it, or maybe it wasn't taught, in a way that was motivated by applications. So I'm going to, start really, really simple, remind you what the derivative power, the derivative is, power rule, chain rule. But I'm going to also really kind of early on focus on the Taylor series, so you have some intuition for what this means and how this works, because we're going to use Taylor series quite a lot in how we understand solutions of differential equations. We're actually going to derive exponential functions and sines and cosines as solutions of differential equations using Taylor series. So this isn't going to be very long, but it's very important. So if you need to brush up on calculus, definitely don't skip these lectures. And then I'm going to jump right into simple ordinary differential equations. So really simple differential equations of a single variable x. So x is some quantity that's changing in time that I care about. Maybe it's the population of bunnies, and those population of bunnies is growing and growing and growing. So the rate of change of x, my population, the number of bunnies in my population, is going to equal, it's going to be a function of my current population. So if I have 100 bunnies, they're going to grow faster than if I only have 10 bunnies. If I have 1,000 bunnies, they'll grow even faster still. So the rate of change of my population in time is a function. It's a linear proportional to the number of bunnies I have in my population currently. And so this is going to be like the simplest entry ODE, ordinary differential equation. And from this, we're going to look at what the solutions are, how to analyze them, how to interpret them, and then we're going to generalize that into much more complicated, rich differential equations. So here, dot just means derivative in time. That's shorthand for ddt of x, where x is the state of my system or some variable that I'm keeping track of as it evolves in time, like a bunny population, or like the radioactive decay of plutonium or uranium or something like that. So we'll start off real simple and build everything from scratch. And then we're going to get to more complicated examples of systems of ordinary differential equations. So now instead of keeping track of one variable like the population of bunnies, now maybe I'm going to keep track of lots of variables I care about. Maybe I am keeping track of the population of bunnies and wolves and a few other species. So I have a multi-dimensional state x that has a few components, x1, x2, x3. And so now this differential equation is going to be a matrix system of differential equations, where A is not a number, it's a matrix that tells me how my system changes in time as a linear function of that system. Okay? So systems of ODEs builds on these simple ones, but very, very important. Lots of examples, lots of cool things you can do with systems of ordinary differential equations. You can model pendula, masses on springs, lots of cool systems you can model. And this is where the linear algebra starts to come in. So when we have systems of ordinary differential equations, A is a matrix, so we're going to be talking about linear algebra. And that's essentially the study of matrices and operators and their properties. And specifically, I'm going to derive the eigenvalues and eigenvectors of this A matrix specifically as a useful set of coordinates or a useful set of quantities that are used to solve the system of ODEs. So we're going to show what it means to make the system easy to solve, and we're going to find that the way that we make that system easy to solve is through an eigenvector coordinate transformation. So we're going to derive eigenvalues and eigenvectors and motivate them as how we solve systems of ODEs. So if you took a linear algebra class in the past and you were confused by eigenvalues and eigenvectors, or you thought they were unmotivated, that couldn't be farther from the truth. They're very easy to understand. They're extremely well motivated. They are the way that we solve systems of ODEs. So I'll derive all of that from scratch. And then we're going to go to more complicated differential equations. So instead of linear differential equations where the rate of change of x is kind of linearly proportional to the state x, we're going to talk about nonlinear differential equations, nonlinear systems. Most of the real world is actually nonlinear. So when I talk about the populations of bunnies and wolves, bunnies are prey and wolves are predators, they don't really behave linearly. There are nonlinear interactions that are important to model. And so we'll talk about those nonlinear systems. That chaotic example, that movie I showed in my first slide, that's an example of the solution of a nonlinear ordinary differential equation. And a lot of my favorite systems really are in this realm here. So the motion of the planets in the solar system is a rich, chaotic, nonlinear system. Your metabolism in your body is a nonlinear dynamical system. Presumably your brain is a very high-dimensional, complex, nonlinear system. So we'll talk about those as well. And throughout all of this, I'm going to be pinning this to numerics and computations. So we're not only going to be talking about how do you do all of this with pencil and paper or on a whiteboard, we're also going to fire up Jupyter notebooks in Python or MATLAB, and we're going to work through how do you actually simulate these differential equations. How can we plot our solutions and confirm that they match our intuition from eigenvalues and eigenvectors. Okay, so everything I'm going to do is going to be pinned to computations, and I'm going to do everything in Python, everything in MATLAB. All of the codes are going to be online, freely available, and open. Okay, so you can kind of pick or choose your language of choice. Good. So that's the high-level overview. This is, again, approximately 7 weeks, about 20 hours, a little bit less than 20 hours of content I'm planning. And this fits into the larger framework of engineering mathematics. This is the math you need to know if you want to do real science and engineering kind of at the next level beyond calculus. Okay, and again, I always like to point out, a lot of what I'm going to be telling you about is pretty classical, pretty analytic. It can almost feel a little dry or desiccated. Some of it's hundreds of years old, a few hundreds of years old. Most of the differential equations that we deal with, at least to begin with, come from things like Newton's F equals ma, and they're built on the calculus, that was around since Newton and Leibniz. And so some of this, can feel pretty classical. And that's okay, that's fine. We're gonna, we need to build somewhere. But we're going to use these techniques, these pencil and paper techniques, and I really find it important. I want to convey to you how we use the intuition we get from paper and pencil calculations for advanced topics. Like now in the modern era with computers, we're not limited to paper and pencil. We can simulate very, very complex systems, very high dimensional, very nonlinear, things you could never solve by hand with paper and pencil, things that even Isaac Newton couldn't solve analytically. The flow, the fluid flow past a cylinder. We have to simulate this or run experiments. But the intuition we build for the classic systems that you can solve with paper, with eigenvalues and eigenvectors and linear systems and things like that, these ordinary differential equations I'm going to introduce you to, we build a tremendous amount of intuition for how the world works and how differential equations and dynamical systems, how things change in time from those analytic classic solutions. And we're going to carry that intuition with us when we do advanced modern computational methods, or even more recently, data-driven analysis and machine learning methods. So it's very important to me that I'm not just telling you about things that were discovered 300 years ago, but I want you to know how we can take our analytic solutions, things we can actually solve in closed form, and how we can translate that to really hard modern problems, things like advanced simulations and advanced machine learning models, where no one can write down the solution to these. We need computers for these, but we can still gain intuition from the classics. So that's a really important perspective here of how that fits in. Good. Okay. So again, this is the overview of topics. I've already walked you through these. And then the next thing I want to tell you in this video is how this fits in to, once you learn this material, you invest this 20 hours, what does that open up to you? What are the next things? And I have most of these next steps actually filmed up. So once you learn this, you can go kind of learn the next things. Okay, so what's next? At least when I teach this as a 2-quarter sequence for my students, I have 2 weeks on complex analysis. So solutions of differential equations are naturally going to involve complex numbers and complex functions. So we'll spend, not in this sequence, but in a future sequence, we'll spend 2 weeks of complex analysis. We'll introduce vector calculus and partial differential equations, so generalizing these ordinary differential equations, which are just a single derivative in terms of the independent variable. Now we're going to look at multiple derivatives of different independent variables. So I can take, derivatives of a function in time and in space and relate those. That's what's known as a partial differential equation. And that's inherently built on the language of vector calculus. So this, for me, is actually a unit. Vector calculus and partial differential equations go together in the same way that ordinary differential equations and linear algebra go together. So I'm actually teaching this as a unit. Again, that's after this kind of intro to differential equations. You can then learn complex analysis, vector calculus, and PDEs. We're also, in this 2-quarter sequence, going to introduce the Fourier and Laplace transform, very closely related to differential equations, especially partial differential equations. And I'm not just going to talk about kind of, again, classic analytic, hundreds of years old Fourier and Laplace transforms. I'm also going to talk about how you do this in a computer with discrete Fourier transforms and things like that. How do you use those for, not just solving differential equations, how do you use those for things like audio processing or image compression? So this is kind of one of my favorite topics, is really this is transitioning from differential equations and solving physics problems to maybe solving data science problems. How do I compress images and audio? How do I do things like that? And that segues very naturally into kind of, and this is only a teaser in my 2-quarter engineering math sequence, but I have a whole kind of boot camps and courses on this alone. Once we have learned about Fourier transforms and Laplace transforms, and we have that kind of understanding of what linear algebra means, it's really natural to introduce modern data-driven techniques, data decompositions and machine learning. Things like the singular value decomposition, which generalize the Fourier transform to more complex and rich systems. So this is usually one of my students, one of my favorite topics and one of the favorite topics of my students when I teach it. This is kind of all culminating towards these advanced topics. And I'll also point out the differential equations you're going to learn in this sequence, in this course, are going to be very, very applicable to control systems. So if you want to learn about control systems and you want to kind of dive into the control boot camp, this is the starting point, is really learning about differential equations and linear algebra so that you feel comfortable. So these are all of the topics that are kind of opened up after you take this course. So I'm super excited. Like, for me, this opened up the whole world of engineering applied math and physics, and I hope, my dream, this would be the absolute best outcome, is if even a small fraction of you feel the same way, that this opens up possibilities for you as well. Okay? Good. So I hope you can tell that, I love this. I'm passionate about it. This is what I want to do, is to teach you this math. Okay, so that's what's next. And I think for the rest of this video, I'm just going to give you some cool examples and applications of things, cool applications that you can start studying and understanding once you have a handle on differential equations. So for me, one of my passions and fields of applied interest is fluid mechanics. I find fluids really interesting because, literally we live and work inside of a fluid, and so do all of our machines. Your heart is pumping fluid through your veins. Almost every trillion-dollar industry has a working fluid at the heart of it. If you think about energy, transportation, defense, health, all of these have fluids. Wind turbines and automobiles and trains and planes and cars all operate in fluids. And at the end of the day, fluid dynamics are governed by a set of differential equations that you can write down. Essentially, it generalizes Newton's second law of momentum conservation to fluids. Okay, so this is an example of a differential equation that we can understand and solve after these techniques. Some other cool examples of differential equations that come up all the time involve mixing. So mixing is a really big problem industrially and scientifically. How do you, let's say you're trying to make let's say you're trying to make aspirin, not acid. Maybe you want to make acid, but you're making aspirin. in a big chemical vat, and so you're adding all these ingredients and you want to mix them as efficiently as possible. How do you put in stirring rods and things like that to mix this system as efficiently as possible? Again, this is a dynamical system that is governed by a set of differential equations, that tell you how the system is going to mix. So that chaotic Lorentz attractor I showed you in my first slide, that's an example of a chaotic system that mixes efficiently in time. And once you understand how to solve differential equations, you can do things like drop little test particles in these fluid systems, in these vector fields. So this is a jellyfish, and this is one of my favorite examples where researchers actually measured the vector field, kind of the fluid flow field behind this jellyfish using measurement techniques, experimental measurement techniques, and then thinking about that fluid vector field or velocity field as a differential equation, you can think of where little food particles would advect in that differential equation. You could integrate those forward along this differential equation and figure out where they'll go. And so, for example, Sean Shadden, John DeBerry, and Jerry Marsden in this really, really cool paper showed that by integrating these particles, you can find regions where some particles get ejected into the propulsive wake of the jellyfish, whereas other particles, these green particles, get kind of entrained into the bell or the feeding region. And so again, this is they were using differential equations and the same exact techniques I'm going to teach you about in this series to integrate these test particles and to make this kind of scientific discovery of how jellyfish eat. I can't help myself. I'm also going to show this really cool kind of follow-on work by John DeBerry and Kit Parker, where they actually design a mechanical jellyfish. This is using, I believe, tissue from a mouse or a rat heart, some rodent heart, that they put in a fluid that has electrolytes, and they're going to pulse this electrolyte solution and kind of get this artificial jellyfish to swim. So this is when they start pulsing the fluid. They put current through that fluid, and this thing starts to pulse. And again, you can understand this is a dynamical system. It has a state that varies in time according to rules, F equals ma kinds of rules. And so you can write down a differential equation and understand how to design and optimize and predict the motion of this system. Other things you can do with differential equations is understand, geophysical flows, ocean flows, climate systems. Things like if there's an oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico, where is that oil going to go? Can you predict, where things are going to go and have your models match, again, based on these differential equations and solution techniques to those differential equations? This is a cool simulation that I like by Philippe Dutoit, where he applied that same basic analysis to the entire global ocean model to figure out where are regions where mixing occurs and where mixing doesn't occur and things like that. Again, using basic techniques and differential equations that I'll tell you about in this class. And like I mentioned before, for me, fluids is really interesting, but the whole world is not just fluids. There are, climate processes and chemical processes, combustion processes. Those are all systems that change in time according to rules. And that's all that a differential equation is a set of rules for how your system changes in time. Good. So in this, we will also touch on chaos. I've already alluded, chaos for me is one of the most fascinating topics in all of applied math because it comes up so often when we analyze systems. Maybe they seem to be orderly for some parameters, and when you change a parameter, it becomes very chaotic and unpredictable. So that's something we'll talk about is how can you simulate these systems? How can you diagnose chaos? How do you handle it numerically? What are some of the tools to analyze it? It turns out that the solar system, the planets in the solar system have chaotic motion, which I think is kind of interesting. So they appear to be going around in ellipses around the sun, which is true. But if you are a satellite, or if you want to send a space probe to Jupiter, there are these kind of chaotic trajectories that you can leverage for energy efficient space travel, which is one of my favorite examples of a dynamical system. Again, a lot of our knowledge of dynamical systems, if you go back to Newton and Leibniz and kind of the classics, a lot of this was motivated by understanding, planets in the solar system. And a lot of research still goes into this topic. I'll talk about things like, double pendula. This is one of my favorite tabletop examples of a chaotic dynamical system. So this is actually me in a lecture in person about 10 years ago. And this is my double pendulum setup that I built. I'm just going to run this again. Good. Maybe I'll even bring that into this Lightboard Studio. I'm trying to figure out where I would mount it. I'm going to give you a lecture on chaos in the double pendulum, what it means, and how to simulate it, things like that. If you have these differential equations and you understand how to use them, you can do things like do control design and actually, harness the dynamics and overcome that chaos to do things like stabilize, a trajectory that you want. And it's super interesting. Humans walking, so I am an inverted double pendulum approximately as a walker. If you, shot Novocaine or lidocaine into my legs, I'd fall over because I'm unstable. I'm approximately stable right now. Sometimes I'm more unstable than others. And, so even like humans walking and biolocomotion, very much a dynamical system governed by differential equations. And we can understand how to control those systems and how to analyze those systems, again, using the techniques from this class. And once you can control these systems, you can do things like rehabilitation medicine. You can also do things like, landing a rocket. This is an inverted pendulum control system that you're trying to land this inverted pendulum with as little control as possible. So again, this is a pretty good example of a differential equation that we want to write down and analyze and eventually control. The combustion in the rocket engine, also a dynamical system, the wind flowing over this thing, the fluid flow environment, also a differential equation. So it really is kind of a rich, almost everything you can think of as a differential equation at the end of the day, and except things that are static and don't move. Okay? You hope your bridge that you build is not a dynamical system, but everything else really is. Okay, good. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. That's really the very high level. I've been looking forward to this class for a long time. I've been teaching this for 10 years. This is one of the things I'm most passionate about, and I'm super, super excited to, to give this to a broader audience. Please let me know what's confusing, what made sense, what you liked, what you didn't like. This is going to be a living set of lectures. Again, all of the resources are going to be made open, PDFs of the notes and all of the codes. I'm excited to walk you through all of this. I'm going to try to release all of these videos pretty soon, so you're going to see this, and then hopefully within a very short amount of time, all of this is going to be following. So I'll also have playlists again in the description, so you can go to that playlist so you don't get lost about where, what's the next video. You can kind of follow this in the right order. Good. Okay. Just some sneak peeks of things I'm going to show you because I have a little bit of time left. I'm going to, again, I've already mentioned this, but this is one of my absolute favorite lectures to give because it made so much sense to me. It was something I struggled with, and I had bad explanation after bad explanation, and it finally clicked when I started thinking about eigenvalues and eigenvectors as a coordinate transformation. So eigenvectors, the eigenvectors of a matrix, is a coordinate transformation. It's a matrix that changes my coordinates so that my differential equation x dot equals ax becomes diagonal, which means it's easy to solve. So, this is just a teaser. I'm going to have a whole lecture on this, but I'm really excited to share the intuition, about how eigenvalues and eigenvectors, I think, are best understood when you think about solving differential equations. And when you want to solve differential equations, eigenvalues and eigenvectors are like your most powerful tools. That's how we think about and analyze and understand all of the dynamics of these differential equations. So this is going to be a killer lecture. Another one, I'm going to show you how you take a fluid flow like this, how you write down the differential equation. Let's say I have a little particle here. I drop a little dust particle x, and it moves around in this fluid flow field u. So u is literally a velocity field, a vector field that varies in space x and in time t. And we're going to look at how that velocity field, that vector field of the fluid, is a differential equation for how a passive particle would move if I drop a little dust particle or a smoke particle. And in this class, we're going to look at how to numerically integrate those test particles forward throughout that flow field and extract really interesting, useful quantities like these cool movies and other things like it. Okay, that's it for now. Stay tuned. This is going to be a lot. We're going to build up real simple, from basic calculus that you either have seen or hopefully remember. And then we're going to hit the ground running. It's going to go slow, but it's going to build up quick. And it's going to open up a huge, huge set of engineering applied math possibilities. So I'm super excited. Stay tuned, and I'll see you next time. Thanks.